Hello and welcome to the State of Politics. We're back. Sorry we've not been here for a couple of weeks. I've had COVID. There's been multiple other issues, so we are back. We've not went away, and there's plenty to chat about and a catch up, which includes a certain health secretary, government minister who is no longer in his position. So as usual, I'm joined by Patrick McGill. Patrick, how's things been?
Good, good. Been a few weeks away, but glad to get back. How are you feeling after your recovery?
Yep, I'm fine. Again, we warrant everybody, please take it seriously, get your vaccine if offered it, and continue to stick to the rules. But actually, we can kick off with that just now. We're currently at a point in this pandemic where the narrative seems to have changed. Obviously, we've been in this now for well over a year. Case numbers at the moment are at its peak since, I think, the turn of the year. And we're seeing more cases at this point in time than even we did at the start of the pandemic. So there's a bit of worry there, but it looks as if the vaccine is cutting the link between hospitals, admissions, and people actually testing positive for the virus. So, Patrick, at this moment in time, there's two dates, two indicative dates set down, that new word that we've learned, of the 19th of July and the 9th of August. Do you think Scotland's going to be out of this now?
Well, hopefully. I know yesterday it was the highest number of cases Scotland has ever recorded since the start of the pandemic, but I think over recent weeks we've had reports that the link between cases and hospitalisations and deaths has been allegedly broken. So, that could be good news, but that remains to be seen whether that's true or not. You obviously want cases to stay low because you've experienced the virus. I think your father has as well. A few of my friends have coming back up from London. It's a terrible thing, even if you don't have to go into hospital. So you want people to follow the rules and definitely get the vaccine so that there's less cases. But hopefully we are on the way out, and it's that 9th of August date I think everyone's looking forward to, especially us Celtic fans possibly getting back into the stadium as well.
Yeah, it'd be great to get back to the football and even gigs. I know probably a lot of people that tune into A State of Mind like their concerts too. Skimmer Celtic will be on tonight. Usual Kev and Boyce will be talking about all things music with that Celtic twist on it. But on COVID and on health, it has been a right juicy week in terms of a complete explosive scandal in Westminster. Matt Hancock, Patrick, what has been your take even before all this on his handling of the pandemic?
Well, I'm no fan of the Tories, so I wanted him to resign as soon as he got the job. But with the handling of the pandemic, you saw very, very early on we were one of the last countries to lock down. I think even America had locked down before us. I think apart from Brazil and Sweden, who just never locked down, we were one of the last in the Western world. Absolutely abominable. Is that a word? Abominable.
Don't know if it isn't. You've just made it up.
It's an abomination. He's done a terrible job, but in the end, that hasn't been what he's resigned for. He's given £1 billion contracts to his mates who run pubs in his village or whatever for PPE. Track and Trace has been giving away billions and billions with, is it Dido Harding? Is that her name?
Yep.
Who wants to be the new NHS boss. Hopefully that won't happen. And in the end, he's resigned over an affair with a secret camera in one of his offices. And I think what's happened is, obviously the photo came out. I think that was on the Thursday, and then on the Friday the video came out with the audio, and then he resigned. So I'm thinking the weekend papers had a wee bit more, and that's why he's had to go. But of all the things he could have resigned for, especially with his boss having about 5 affairs in the past 10 years, allegedly, it's that nothing surprises you anymore.
Yeah, it's kind of. I think when you look at the whole situation, that the fact that it's taken them till this point to resign is a bit, I want to say bemusing, but it's not because of what we've watched in terms of the Tories since election in 2019. Obviously described by Keir Starmer as sleaze, but a bullying scandal by Priti Patel leading to one of the most high-standing civil servants to resign from their position due to bullying. And then the whole Dominic Cummings scandal, which I don't think we've actually had a chance to talk about, the whole whiteboard, won't use the expletive, but we're totally FU'd. So yeah, it's been, a whirlwind, but yet again, the polls at this point in time, of course, we're still a long, long way away from another general election, are still well in the Tories' favour.
Yeah, I think they've taken a wee bit of a hit, so they're only about 9 or 10 points ahead as opposed to the 14 or 15. But I mean, I think that's more a reflection on the opposition. I mean, the opposition, I think, apart from Keir Starmer and Ed Miliband, nobody really knows who's on the Labour front bench. Nobody can really name any of their policies, apart from they oppose independence and they support Brexit, which is a great position to be in Scotland. Um, yeah, I mean, Keir Starmer, I think he said last month he was going to unleash a wave of new policies. I don't know why he didn't do that last year. It's an absolute mystery as to what his plan is, and we'll come on to Batley and Spen later. But I mean, that could be some serious pressure on him. But as you say, with the deaths and the scandals and the resignations that should have been, I mean, we saw in March the heightened drama with Nicola Sturgeon could have been forced to resign over breaching the ministerial code. I think Boris Johnson's done it about 9 times in the 2 years he's been Prime Minister. Priti Patel investigated herself for a bullying scandal. It's absolutely incredible. I mean, they should all
Yeah,
be resigning, really.
it is incredible, and it looks as if nothing has changed at this point in time. As you say, the spotlight was on Scottish First Minister, and if she had broken the ministerial code, I would have hoped that likely she would have, left her position, but obviously it was found that she hadn't. Um, in terms of the Tories' approach to this in the past few weeks, I think people are even more sceptical now in terms of there was NHS bosses coming out saying we had no faith in the health service, and there's still going to be this looming question over Boris Johnson, which I'm sure will be asked tomorrow at Prime Minister's question time, is why he never sacked Matt Hancock himself.
Yeah, I saw a thing from the Daily Mail. Obviously, I would never read the Daily Mail. It just sort of pops up in the Twitter account. Boris Johnson, in an interview, sort of insinuated that he actually sacked Matt Hancock. So I'm sure we'll find out at some point whether that's true or not. He stood by him when the photo first came out, and then the video came out, and then he resigned. It really is interesting to see who leaked that in the end, because you would imagine it's someone within Downing Street. But if Boris Johnson was standing with him and then sacked him, I can't see it being him. But yeah, I mean, it will be interesting whether he told him to resign or whether he resigned out of his own decision making. But yeah, it's a terrible saga, and the guy who's replaced him, who's getting I think £150,000 a year from JP Morgan, who are looking at healthcare investments in the United Kingdom, that doesn't bode well for the future of the NHS either.
Well, Paul Sav's come in the comments saying Hancock's replacement will be no better. In fact, I think he'll be more likely to sell off the healthcare service due to his links with American medical insurance companies. Obviously, this Brexit saga that the UK is still involved in terms of trade deals, specifically with America and Australia, has still begs more questions, especially here in Scotland in terms of farming. In terms of the health service under a Tory government, do you ever feel as if it's 100% safe?
No, never, no way. I think I read a month or two ago that they'd sold off 37 general practices, GP surgeries across England, and that's how it's going to happen. There's not going to be a bill that passes that sells the entire NHS off to multinational American healthcare companies. It's going to be slow and steady, selling off one hospital at a time, and Sajid Javid's only going to accelerate that and encourage that and make his friends at JP Morgan more money. Obviously, one of the arguments is it's only safe in Labour hands. That is really the case. When will they get their hands on the reins of government? Probably not until 2028 or 2029 under a new leader. They might have a new leader after this by-election on Thursday, who knows? But I mean, in my opinion, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, independence would be the only way to secure the NHS stays in public hands, along with all the other public services that we all rely on.
Yeah, that is obviously our shared opinion on that and the constitutional question. But in terms of the Labour Party, never mind looking forward to the next leader. What about some old leaders? Yesterday, a report came out saying that some senior Labour MPs wanted to encourage former Prime Minister Tony Blair back to the House of Commons. Do you ever could you envisage Tony returning to UK politics, especially after everything that happened in the report which came out only a few years ago? Chilcot report, that right?
Yeah, I mean, I would absolutely love to see Tony Blair back in frontline politics, because on Twitter you have to deal with all these fans of Blairites, who are saying that, oh, we need Tony back, we need someone to emulate Tony Blair because he's the only one that can win an election. Well, if he's so good at winning elections, he should come back and prove it with his -24 net favourability rating and his war crimes. But I mean, I seen Andrew Adonis, who's a big fan of Tony Blair, sits in the House of Lords unelected. He'll be there till he dies, picking his dream cabinet. And I think he was putting people like John Major as the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland and Ken Clarke as the Chancellor. So it shows you where these people sit ideologically on how they would run the economy, that they would want people like Ken Clarke as Chancellor, a Thatcherite Cabinet Minister.
Yeah, almost turning UK politics into that split between Republicans and Democrats, which really it shouldn't be, especially if Labour are still the working class party. Touched on Tony Blair there. So I don't think we've chatted about this. Gordon Brown has made a return a wee bit to politics in terms of the past few weeks, launching a campaign to basically save Scotland's place in the Union. He said it's not better together. The influence of Gordon Brown in the 2014 referendum cannot be underestimated. He did come back. It probably did change voters' minds. He played his part in it along with other people in Better Together. Do you think that Gordon Brown could ever return to, whether it be the Scottish Parliament or Westminster again? Because it seems at this point in time as if Labour are trying to cling on to the past, but surely at this point it's the past that's hurting them.
Yeah, I mean, I can't see Gordon Brown. I think he's 71 now, coming back to frontline politics. I think it's Our Scottish Future, his think tank. So it's definitely centred around Scotland. It's not a UK-wide task he's taken up there. And I think it is to look into how the union can be saved. I think if you're setting up a think tank to look at ways the union can be saved, it shows you what a dire state the union is in. Not only that, the only party that would implement his policies would be the Labour Party, and the Labour Party don't look anything like winning in 2024, certainly not on its own.
Not at this point
so,
in time.
So you're looking at like 2028, 2029, and have we to just sort of suffer on for those 7 or 8 years when we could be using those 7 or 8 years to set up a new independent state, forging new alliances with Scandinavian countries, European countries, South American countries? It's hardly worth it. It's hardly worth it. But I mean, he's a very intelligent man, very respectable figure, and I'm sure he's got good ideas. But it would be good if he could contribute those ideas and see how they would fit into an independent Scotland.
2028-29 is one of the dates that we probably look at. By 2024, Keir Starmer at this point in time, his ratings aren't very good. We saw a spat about a week ago between Andy Burnham and the Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon. Many people thought that Burnham was actually only doing that for his own political good and savvy to launch his campaign as Labour leader. Do you think that there's any chance that in, whether it be the coming month or year, that we could see Andy Burnham put his hat back into the ring to become Labour leader, but obviously not as an MP, as the Mayor of Manchester at this point in time?
Well, this is the interesting thing, because if there was to be a leadership battle anytime soon, it could only be an MP that can challenge Keir Starmer, because the leader of the Labour Party, in Labour Party rules, has to be an MP. So what they would have to do is either get him a seat somewhere, which, someone would either have to die or resign. So I don't think that's a possibility. Or they'd have to have a conference to change the rules to say that any elected representative, or any person for that matter, can be Labour leader. But I can't see him being Labour leader anytime soon, because I just think it's not possible. I think he's probably planning on replacing Keir Starmer after the next election. But after the next election, they could be 150 seats away from a majority of one. So it's a hell of an uphill battle he would have in his hands at that stage. And I don't think he's that popular a politician. with regards to the Nicola Sturgeon thing, I think it's a bit petty. I'm not sure how many people are actually interested. I mean, you seen today, we're talking about at the start of the podcast, highest number of cases in Scotland since the start of the pandemic, and he's worried about people getting their train tickets refunded and spas getting their deposits. You know, it pales in insignificance, really, and I think it is all a bit of a publicity stunt. I'm not sure how well that's going to work out for him, because he needs to win voters back in Scotland, and in Scotland Nicola Sturgeon's a very popular figure, so going after her for something as silly as this, as opposed to the valid criticisms that there are of the government, I think is a bit silly.
Yeah, and that travel ban on Manchester has now been lifted today, after all that we've seen. And again, you know, I don't know if on the flip side that Andy Burnham would have been causing too much of a hassle had the First Minister phoned him up to tell him that it was being lifted to allow people into Manchester. So, yeah, I think there's, as you say, there's a lot more that Andy Burnham could criticise the Scottish Government for, and it just looked as if it was a kind of desperate attempt to put them down, and a, you know, as you say, quite a petty argument. There was plenty more things that he could be challenging the government on. You know, but something I found that you said that was quite interesting is whether they changed the rules in conference. Now, we've heard from one of the figures in terms of Gordon Brown and others, Neil Finlay, who's been on the show, in terms of that Devo Max option being a potential on the ballot if we do have another independence referendum. If Labour were to change the rules in terms of allowing mayors of cities to become leader, do you think we could see Labour change direction completely? Not maybe by 2024, but further on in terms of that federal United Kingdom?
Well, this is where you have to give credit to Andy Burnham, because he's telling the Labour Party to buy into English devolution, and I have absolutely no idea why they wouldn't do that. I thought this was something that they'd fully bought into already, because they've been talking about a second chamber, getting rid of the House of Lords and having a second chamber of the regions and nations, and having a federal UK of the regions and nations. Keir Starmer even said it in his leadership contest. I think a lot of people in the Labour Party talk about federalism. I think this is where the hypocrisy lies, actually, because in 2012, Alex Salmond wanted a third option, a sort of Devo Max option on the ballot paper, and all three unionist parties fought against that. And then in the final weeks of the referendum, they all came up to Scotland and promised Devo Max, Gordon Brown as well. They didn't deliver on it.
Devo Max Light, maybe add.
Yeah, aye. So near federalism they promised, and we get next to nothing like that. I think all 50 states in America have more powerful state assemblies than what Scotland does with the devolved parliament. So I think, I mean, this is where they're sort of caught, Labour, because even if they were to promise federalism, nobody really believes them. And the argument is still the same, where you would actually need them to be in government, and it's incredibly difficult to get Labour in government. And even if every single Scottish voter were to vote Labour, they might still not be in government, because we only have 59 seats. It's actually going to go down to 57. So I think they just have to take a neutral position, really, sort of advocate for a referendum if the Parliament votes for one, and then let their MSPs and councillors and MPs choose what side they want to argue. You might see Monica Lennon, and I think Katie Clark is a new South of Scotland list MSP. I could have that wrong, but I think she is. She was advocating for a referendum. Those two might advocate for independence if they were all to come together and decide on a unified plan, as opposed to an SNP plan, which they don't seem too keen on.
Yeah, Strange loved the doctors came in to say Labour for Independence would be a great start in Scotland. I think they probably would pull quite a lot of voters back if they were to back that plan. But yeah, English devolution is very interesting, and it's something that, as you touched on there, Patrick, some of the devolved parliaments, especially during the whole Brexit process, felt very much so out in the wilderness, left out. But again, you know, Labour, to get back into government, are going to have to depend on parts of England which they've lost most recently, working class areas who have voted Labour for a long time. And again, depending if there was ever to be a vote on federalism, whether or not that vote would hold up in some places, and then places that they would be dependent upon could actually snooker them all together in it. which would not, because, I think for Labour to actually succeed now, it is something that they have to look at, because, they're in control in London still, Manchester, and the big cities are doing well in England. Liverpool is still a Labour stronghold, but when you start to go down the south, you even start to pick up parts of the north and in the middle, that blue wall is developing now. Ed Davey would probably disagree with me there, as he's been hitting it down. But to flip on to this, and I didn't actually think this would be a conversation that we'd be having a couple of weeks ago, do you think there's a possible new ground for the Lib Dems to pick themselves back up upon in England?
I never thought we'd be talking about that either.
No.
I think what you've got to be wary of with that, I mean, obviously Tories losing seats would be viewed as a good thing by us two and people who watch the show probably, but the Lib Dems are probably more than willing to work with them again. I mean, they should have the good common sense to never go into a coalition with the Tories again after what happened, but I think they probably would if they were offered. So, I mean, a Lib Dem MP is slightly better than a Tory MP. I know Leila Moran, who ran for leader and lost to Ed Davey. She's very progressive. She was for a universal basic income and all sorts of other progressive social policies. But I think when you look at, Bristol to London or Bristol to Oxford, there's about 90 seats, and only a handful aren't won by the Tories at elections. So they've got 80 odd seats that they can just bank on. I think if the Lib Dems are best placed to eat into that, or even maybe the Greens, I know Caroline Lucas is down there, that's a good thing. And this is where a progressive alliance could possibly come in. Because you look at the Labour Party, they won about 200 seats. They need 326 to govern. You've got, when you combine the SDLP, the Greens, Plaid Cymru and the SNP, you've got about a block of 50 seats there. So if the Labour Party were to win 80 to 100, they could depend on these progressive parties to work with them in government. And I think that's probably the future of British politics until we move to a proportional representation system, Labour working with other progressive forces in order to get back into government.
In terms of tactical voting especially, and people playing the system, it was something that a lot of people are making out on during the Scottish election, especially due to the way the system works here, the additional member system. That in England, could if you envisage a tactical vote in hope that the Lib Dems, yes, there could be a deal there to work with the Tories once again, but a deal to work with the Labour Party once again, because I think I'm right in saying that in a lot of seats that are quite marginal in England, it's the Lib Dems that are behind the Tories. Could you see that as a possible coalition coming to fruition if people were to tactically vote in England in the next election?
I think the Lib Dems are second in about 80 seats. I'm not sure if that's UK-wide or just in England, but they're second in about 70 seats. So if they can target those 70 seats, as opposed to standing 620 candidates and losing half their deposits, if they were to really focus on those 70 or 80 seats, they could do real damage and gain a lot of ground, And especially if you look at an electoral pact or a progressive alliance or whatever, Labour, Lib Dem, even the Greens, there's not a lot of room for the SNP to go any further. But in Plaid Cymru in Wales and the SDLP in Northern Ireland, you could see a lot of growth if these people were to work together, campaigning where they stand a chance, really have a focused, laser-focused campaign.
Yeah, but I think one of the things that will always hold back, especially Labour, the Lib Dems, is the fact of working with nationalist parties who would probably want a referendum or something at the deal, which, we heard Douglas Ross especially, obviously from the Tories, in the TV debate saying that he wouldn't work with the SNP. So, yeah, I think there has to be a point, especially in terms of how this Tory power grip, in the UK could be halted, is to work together, but it would come at a cost for the unionist parties, and I don't know if that's a cost that they want to, put in the table, because at the end of the day, it could be the thing that puts some of their colleagues out of jobs and puts an end to the UK. But again, we don't know what the state of the UK is going to be in by 2024, or the 2029 election. As we touched on earlier, Brexit and deals aren't done yet. With Australia, there's a big threat in this to Scottish farmers. Jim Fairley, a friend of the podcast, who gave us a wee tweet a few weeks back on our episode with Rosanna Cunningham, has been a real advocate for Scottish farmers on this. Do you think that, especially fishermen as well in Scotland, that there's been big industries sold out on this Brexit deal badly?
100%, and I think a lot of people seen it coming as well. It was sold to farmers and fishermen that these guys they wouldn't have the quotas enforced on them. I believe I think there was something like a 12% or 13% quota on fishermen, and that would be binned under Brexit. But of course, I think they get like agricultural subsidies and stuff like that. And not only that, we saw a few months ago, I think it was January time, the queues at the Dover-Cally crossing and the Channel Tunnel, all those queues, all the agriculture in the back of those big lorries just died and became rotten. And if they're going to have to wait for visas and other passport checks and quantity checks and quality checks, because there's going to be a border now, you are fishing more, but in order to sell it to the same market, it's taking longer and the quality is less. So, I mean, I think they've taken a hit. They've taken a hit over COVID, obviously, as well. But I think long term, I think they've been sold down the river, really, farmers and fishermen, by Brexit. And, I think they would probably like to get back into, if not in the EU, then a closer relationship, a sort of favoured deal, because it really isn't working at the moment.
Yeah, I think especially if you look at parts of the very north of Scotland, in terms of some of the water there, it's closer to Scandinavia than it is Scotland. And, typically they would have depended on that market to sell their produce to, and they're not able to do it at this moment in time because of, you say, quotas, prices, even forms that they need to fill in to actually go and do that, meaning that, the stock that they once had that they would be able to shift, they're not able to shift it now, so they're left with it. But, it's very damaging to agriculture in Scotland. And I know at this point in time, the Scottish government and other governments across the devolved nations in the UK have been writing to Liz Truss and not getting an answer. I think Mary Goujon's been in contact multiple times with the UK government and they're not getting an answer. So again, what we were talking about earlier on in terms of federalism and about the relationship which the devolved nations, not even just talking about, cities here, we're talking about nations, have with the UK government at this point in time is fractured. And just as a whole picture, with what we spoke about at the very top of the programme, that what we've got as a basis just now is a complete disaster. And if you actually compare it to the 1980s Britain, this is a whole new level of just scandal and, terrible governance.
Well, I think with the consultant with the devolved nations, I think there was a video leaked of Mark Drakeford after a call with Boris Johnson saying he's just awful, isn't he? And I know that ideologically they're miles apart, Mark Drakeford and Boris Johnson, but it just shows you the intransigence that they're treating devolved nations with. I know when Brexit first sort of kicked off, the SNP, Nicola Sturgeon, I think Mike Russell as well, Angus Robertson, devised a plan for Scotland to have a close relationship with the Single Market and Customs Union. I think Michael Gove and Theresa May said that wasn't possible, despite the fact that Northern Ireland have now got that special relationship. I think Kent is now some kind of a buffer zone. It has that special relationship. I think there was talks of Sunderland and London having that special relationship because of it being the big city, and then also Sunderland having the car factory, despite the fact it voted leave by about 60%. So, yeah, and I think in the past year or so with Gordon Brown, new ideas with federalism and all these different unionist sort of plots to try and convince Scotland to stay. There was talks of a Scottish Government minister attending cabinet in London on a weekly basis. I can't see London going for that. The egomaniacs that run Whitehall and Downing Street, their pride would take a hit having some Welsh and Scottish ministers sitting in there and contributing. And with these big decisions, with Brexit, you can't just go head first and drive hard in to whatever you want to do, because I think the problem Theresa May had was she was trying to get a deal that the House of Commons would back. She was trying to get those 326 votes, and she ended up not getting them. But there was absolutely no interest in what was best for Scotland, what was best for Wales, what was best for Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland was a complete afterthought up until that March 2019 vote. I think the first vote was actually January 2019. A complete afterthought. And you can't imagine Germany doing that. They've got a federal system. I think they've got 7 or 8 states, Bavaria, and all the rest. You can't imagine them, Angela Merkel, not consulting with the 7 or 8 governors or first ministers or whatever it is they have over there. So it's such a broken system, and it needs so much of a rethink that I personally believe, and I'm sure you're the same, it's not actually worth doing.
No, I think it is broken, and it really is, and it probably isn't worth doing. And in terms of, what we've got at the moment, one country who you've just mentioned there and passing politically at this moment in time is a complete disaster in the UK, and that is Northern Ireland. Complete instability. We do not have, I don't think, still, a unity in terms of what the government is. There's been that split between the DUP and Sinn Féin. The DUP can't agree on who they want to be the party leader. For Northern Ireland especially, I think for a lot of Northern Irish people who actually voted for Brexit will not be one bit happy with the deal that they've actually got out of it either.
No, I mean, what you've effectively got at the moment is a hard border down the Irish Sea. I think that is subject to change with the negotiations that are going on still at the moment. It's like a 4th transition period on top of the first transition period that Theresa May first agreed. You've sort of got a soft border with the Republic of Ireland. People can still travel freely, and they're still basically in the single market and customs union. You've obviously seen rising tensions. I think a few months ago there was petrol bombs and police vans getting blown up, which is not what you want to see. I would like to see a united Ireland, personally.
Yep.
I don't know if that's the answer just now. I think that would only stoke tensions. But whatever's going on just now obviously isn't working either. So it's actually a mystery as to what needs to happen. I think it's such a complex issue, and I think this is actually where people like Tony Blair and John Major could be consulted. Maybe not brought back to the front line of British politics, but definitely consulted in what to do. And you can't just be dismissing people's opinions like the executive in Downing Street tends to do, no matter whether it's Boris Johnson, Theresa May or David Cameron. You really do need to listen to the experts and listen to people who have resolved these problems in the past and people who have expertise in Northern Ireland, because it's such a complex issue.
But I think on that as well, if there was ever the possibility of the Tories once again basically taking over control of the Secretary of State, and especially on different policies, again, we were talking about tensions there. That could cause even more tension, because democratically, especially for nationalists, it's not a situation that they would want to come towards. So that there's a split both ways here, and it just at this point in time doesn't look as if it's going to work. You're talking about, bringing back old leaders. Northern Ireland is also going to be imperative in terms of this Brexit deal with the USA. Biden obviously met with Boris Johnson, Angela Merkel, Macron, and all the other leaders at the G7 summit. I found one of the most interesting parts of that whole meeting was when Macron hosted the EU leaders himself. How important a tool do you think Northern Ireland's actually going to be in this deal? Because I don't think America is going to accept anything that completely threatens the Good Friday Peace Agreement.
Well, that is the question, isn't it? I think it has actually been such an afterthought that when Dominic Raab was the Brexit Secretary, and I think James O'Brien was the one that asked him, have you read the Good Friday Agreement? He said, I've had a summary of it from one of my aides, and it's absolutely incredible. I think it's only about 20-25 pages long. It's not like the Independence white paper, it's 650 pages. He still should have read it. Had it been 650 pages, but it's only about 25 pages. And this is meant to be the Brexit secretary with Northern Ireland as one of the big issues. And they just don't acknowledge that it is one of the big issues. And I think the problem that they actually have in Westminster is that the Tory government at the moment want to be the government of England, but politically it would be weak for them to lose Scotland, Northern Ireland, and potentially later on Wales. So politically they think they need to hold on to these nations, but it's actually causing them problems for what they want to achieve. But when it comes to Northern Ireland, I think people were actually shocked that this mattered, and that secondly, America was a guarantor of the Good Friday Agreement. I mean, people just didn't know that this was the case. I think politicians didn't know that this was the case. And Biden...
Oh, I think we've lost Patrick. I will just continue on if he comes back in. Obviously, we're touching there on US politics, and we were talking about America in terms of the relationship which they have with Northern Ireland at this point in time, and whether or not that would affect. Patrick is back.
Apologies, I don't know what happened there.
It's okay. I was just covering for you that. I was just saying what you were covering upon there with America's involvement in the peace agreement back in the 90s.
Yeah, Joe Biden obviously links to Ireland. I think his great grandfather went to America during the famine. He is actually the perfect candidate to look out for Northern Ireland's interests. I think at the moment the Good Friday Agreement isn't threatened with a hard border down the Irish Sea.
And the Republic's interest as well, because obviously there is still that very close relationship between the US and the European Union at this point in time. Allies in France, of course, and other nations, and there did seem to be a wee bit of not to sound cheesy, a bromance between Macron and Biden, once again after it being a bit of a fractured relationship between Macron and Trump.
Yeah, I mean, I think ideologically they're pretty similar, Macron and Biden, so they'll get on there. I think they want to probably protect the West's interests geopolitically against Russia. They obviously want to keep a strong partnership. France and America, I think, have a big trade deal together, big trade interests. So, I mean, Macron himself actually faces challenges in France. I think in the next year or so he's getting an election, and I think Marie Le Pen was rising in the beginning of this year, but I think she's sort of stalling now. So it'll be interesting to see what happens within the next 12 to 18 months in France. But Macron, on a global level, seems to be a bit of a calming presence. I don't think Marie Le Pen would offer that at all. So yes, I think when it comes to Northern Ireland, Brexit, Britain, America, I think Biden and Macron, despite their domestic agendas being pretty status quo, are good in the world stage.
Yeah. Speaking of world stage, we've not spoken since the G7. Probably the biggest personality to take out the whole. Actually, two. First, we'll touch on the Prime Minister. His language at one point, we will build back better, greener, and I think, if I'm right, he said more gender neutral. Don't know what he was talking about there, but this is not normal Boris Johnson language, is it? Is this just to appease the people sitting around the table with him?
I have no idea what he's playing at. I think he's been told to mention those words, and he's not really figured out a way to fit them in. I think it might have been a climate change summit actually before the G7, but he was talking about bunny hugging and all that. I mean, he comes away with these phrases, and I think certain people find them funny. But when you actually look at his policies, how he governs, the way he conducts himself, when you realise he's in charge of the country, it's not that funny. It's actually quite concerning. Nobody actually speaks like that. No other world leader has ever spoken like that, apart from maybe Donald Trump.
Yes.
He's a mystery, and he's definitely not the man who should be leading a country at such a tumultuous time.
There are people sitting around that table aren't any great examples, but they're a far more polished bunch than the UK Prime Minister, and they just actually looked like the odd one out. Even the whole elbowing each other it just looked very odd, and it's just on the world stage it just looks bizarre. But on the world stage,
he's not got a proper haircut either. He looks like a clown.
And on a beach in Cornwall, the wind wasn't really helping them, was it?
No, not at all.
World stage, before we wrap up, about 5 minutes time. Joe Biden declared that America was back. Post G7, we went and saw him have a meeting with Vladimir Putin in Switzerland. Do you think America is back in the world stage and can be taken a wee bit more seriously now under Biden's administration? But again, will we see that switch back? Not that we like Donald Trump, but we did see a kind of easing of pressure and tension between America and the East. Do you think that, although obviously still conflict with Iran, but especially in terms of Russia, things did seem to become a wee bit more shallow? Do you think that, America once again will try and move their weight about a bit?
Well, they're certainly moving their weight about, and they're certainly back in Syria and Iraq, where they bombed a few nights ago. That's right enough. They never left, did they? They've been there since 2003, and they've been in Syria for, I think, almost 10 years now. All 7 wars they're fighting over there for oil and other influences. I think they certainly want to be more presentable in the world stage. Whether that actually affects their policies is a different matter. They're still
appealing to allies again, though.
Yeah, but I mean, I think Donald Trump was also pretty close with Britain. I think he acknowledged that he had to be friends with France and Germany, whether he liked it, whether he was whether he used the right diplomatic language is another thing. But I think he recognised, and the people who were actually running the country behind the scenes also recognised that. I think
not that
Russia,
Macron and Merkel probably took him very seriously.
No, not at all. They probably wanted to deal with somebody else, even Mike Pence. Yeah, but I think he's definitely better than Trump. On a lot of areas, he's very similar. It's just the usual American president bombing Middle Eastern countries and looking for oil in these small defenceless nations. But on domestic policies, try to put through an infrastructure deal now. He's failed to get through a $15 minimum wage. I think he's trying to get rid of the filibuster, but that won't work either. But he certainly looks more presentable, despite the fact he's struggling to form sentences.
Yes, that age is probably an issue, which, still an intelligent man, well-experienced politician, but again, it was something last November when the election was taking place that it kind of showed the state of American politics, that the two candidates put forward by the Democrats and Republicans were two white, older gentlemen. So, yeah, America back on the world stage. It will be interesting to see how things unfold. I mean, in the meeting with Putin, I'm sure they discussed Ukraine, elections, and how, Russia obviously targeted for being involved in the US election, something that America did quite a number of times. So I think Joe Biden was forgetting that. But of course, I don't think at any point in time Putin and Biden were ever going to agree on things. Just before we wrap up, Patrick, Scottish politics, anything that's taken caught your eye in the past few weeks since we've not been on at all?
I think the Greens and the SNP have agreed that they can work on, I think it was infrastructure, the economy, climate change, and transport in the cooperation agreement. I thought this was something that was done and dusted, but apparently negotiations are still going on. We'll see their programme for government by September. That should be interesting. Hopefully they include Gender Recognition Act reform. They can we've seen over the COVID pandemics roads being shut for beer gardens and walkways as opposed to cars streaming past for 14 hours a day. Hopefully there's more green transport. We've had a few green MSPs and we've had Fraser in the podcast talking about how integral transport is to saving the climate. So yeah, I think it's gone a bit quiet recently because the election's been done and nothing's really happening. But when we get into September,
still the pandemic as well.
Yeah. But when we get into sort of August, September time, we see what the government are trying to do. It'll become a lot more interesting, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more speculation about how they will do.
And plenty more to talk about on the state of politics. As ever, thanks to everybody who's tuned in. Thanks for all your comments. We should be back in the next number of weeks with some great guests once again. We'll be, hopefully, as things start to open up a wee bit, getting more MSPs, possibly MPs, journalists, political commentators, and other people from the world of politics. But at this point in time, we'd like to once again thank you for tuning in and sign out from the State of Politics. Thanks for watching.